Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about Alien Earth episodes 1 and 2 of season 1. I will start spoiler free because it is a new show, a new premiere to discuss, and it's one that I'm coming into with a lot of expectations, a lot of bias perhaps, because I'm a big fan of the Alien movies, particularly the first two. I find things to enjoy in 3 and Resurrection, but and Romulus as well, to be fair. I just, that's so separate to me because it's like a new thing as opposed to one of the ones that I grew up with. But when they announced there was going to be an Alien TV show, there was like a flurry of feelings, especially as I learned more things about it. When they said it was set on Earth, I was like, oh, that sounds quite cool, because we've not really done that with Alien, unless we're counting the second Alien versus Predator, but no one wants to talk about that. But then they said it was set before the original movie, and I didn't really like that because I don't really get the obsession with constantly doing prequels to things, especially when, at least it feels like to me, it muddies the waters. If not that continuity is the most important thing, but to me it makes things feel less special if there was already xenomorphs on Earth before the events of Alien. I don't really like that conceptually, but whatever. I can get over that if things are good and we can get into it. So I come into this with a love of the IP, a love of what Alien the world is, all the kind of the main lore of the Alien world. But that also does mean I'm maybe a little bit more critical. There's a lot more things that will turn me off, because if something feels a bit weird or different to how they're supposed to be with certain things, then that might rub me the wrong way. Like there's it's a little bit more. I'm a bit too close to it perhaps, and I have to kind of like give that bias up front. Not that I'm, we're about to get into if I liked it or not, but and Noah Hawley, who's doing the show here, he's running the show. He did the Fargo TV show, he did Legion, and I saw a good chunk of both of those shows. I didn't finish either of those shows though, because both of those shows I actually kind of lost interest in over time. Because while there's some really good stuff in those shows that I did recognize and was quite exciting early on, I tended to find his characters and the way he would write dialogue to be just a little bit not for me. To the point where I mean, Legion is the one where when it got to season 3, I watched the first episode and it just felt a little bit like it was, it sounds a bit harsh to say it was up its own ass, but that was kind of the vibe I was having as I was watching that, and I kind of just didn't really want to watch anymore. And I certainly didn't want to have to try and talk about it and justify why I felt the way I did maybe going forward. So I came into this with like, okay, I think Noah Hawley has a lot of potential, but I also think he has pitfalls, and I've kind of eventually given up the other shows that he's done. Now, people do love his other shows. People swear by those 2 shows. There is a fan base of his stuff that are probably going to be ravenous for this. But I came into it with a little bit more muted, kind of like, let's see what he does here with this. Obviously, this is a little bit different than those, because, well, those were also like IP of some kind that was being repurposed. Fargo had been a movie, he made the TV show. Legion, of course, based on an X-Men character. So, Alien's like, maybe my favorite world in fiction. Alien and Aliens are 2 of my favorite movies. Aliens is probably my favorite movie. At least if someone asked for my favorite movie, I'll say Aliens. I think it probably varies a little bit day to day just based on, whatever. But so to get into how I felt about this, spoiler free to begin with. I'll give you warning before I start flying spoilers around. I'm pretty mixed, to be honest, and if anything, I'm kind of verging a little bit closer to negative than I am positive so far. I watched the first episode on Wednesday because that's when it landed, but they put out 2 episodes and I didn't have time to get to the second one, and because I felt pretty mixed after the first one, I kind of wanted to do them both as a pair, but especially since most people are going to watch them that way because they were put out together like a double premiere. So today I was able to watch the second episode, and I'm coming in with a bit more kind of like, a solidified, feeling on the show. Which is to say that there's things in the show I do like. I do like some of the world building. I like the talk of the 5 super companies, corporations that are in charge of everything, and kind of building out what their goals are and what they're competing in, and how they're effectively the government powers of the world now, and that kind of lines up with alien lore of the past. Don't ask me to name all the companies because I don't. Well, I think the one that's in this show that we focus on is called Prodigy. I don't know if that's came up before. Obviously, Weyland-Yutani's the big one, and that used to be two separate companies, Weyland and Yutani, before they merged. Seegson, I want to say, is one of the companies that I've seen in the other kind of lore from like the video games or comic books. But I like the expansion on that and kind of some of the ideas that are coming along with that. Where I'm having some issues, though, I think the tone is kind of weird and all over the place for me. And I think it's detracting from potential thrills and tension when I'm supposed to be feeling kind of like, oh, this is the part that's supposed to feel like the tense section of an alien movie or whatever. Because some of her characters are inherently kind of not, and it's not so much like, because obviously in a TV show or any even a movie, you can cut between your scary plot, but if you've got a plot with other characters who are somewhere else, like you can intercut between those things, and that's not necessarily a bad idea. But there is something about like keeping the tone in such a way where you're not kind of detracting from the feeling. You like I think I'm having a little bit of trouble getting into the groove of like feeling like I'm having fun with the alien stuff. And a big part of that is the fact that a lot of the characters, especially in episode 2, when a lot of those characters are actually in the same location and they're in the kind of the place where everything's going down. And, I mean, I don't think it's a spoiler to say that, the premise of the show kind of starts with like a Weyland-Yutani ship that's got specimens on it crashing into a city on Earth. So everyone's kind of focusing in on that in these first episodes, and maybe even for a lot of the season, if not all of it. But when that's like episode 1, everyone's kind of split up. But episode 2, there's a lot of people that kind of go in there, and it felt like a lot of the characters just like, I don't know, it doesn't feel like they're like in the right place for me to feel like they're adding to the idea of like this is a scary place or whatever. It's kind of nonchalant in a lot of ways with its tone. And I actually, one of the things that kind of bugged me in episode 1, and it's like, obviously there's a very small character who's gone, like, and a like very like just gone, right? So I won't be too specific here. But the acting from this one character before their death is so like low energy and did not feel like terror to me. It felt kind of like, oh, hurry up and let me in because I'm upset, as opposed to hurry up and let me in. There's a like super dangerous monster who's going to rip me apart with his dick mouth. Like, there was definitely some moments of performances that felt really kind of mixed and up and down. And arguably, yeah, the ones that are weaker are the bit parts and the characters that aren't going to be around for very long. And it makes sense that you spend more time getting good actors for your main roles that are going to be here. But it took me out of it. It took me out of the moment. And then this one's definitely more on the nitpick level. Don't get me wrong, I realize how this one's going to sound. But the xenomorph, who we do see in these first 2 episodes, is too dry. And I get how that sounds. I get how crazy I sound. And I didn't even know that could be a complaint I would have. But the more I see of it, because you see a good bit of it in episode 2, it is drilling from the mouth like it does in the movies, but the head, the smooth like head top, is completely dry. And I didn't realize that was something that I wouldn't like, because I don't think I've ever seen it before. Like, it's always kind of oily, and it has kind of a slick look to it. Whereas here, break out the KY jelly. Are they having a shortage or something? Lather that bad boy up. Like, I'm happy you've got a good design that seems faithful. I'm happy you're doing a practical alien. I love these things about it. But for some reason, it's really dry. And I don't know why. And that rhymed, and I didn't mean it to rhyme. So, yeah, I get that one sounds like I'm taking crazy pills, but I really, every time, like, once I noticed it, it became something that every time I saw it, I was like, why does his head look so dry? He should be oozing. He should be oozing. Anyway, so, I mean, that one's a bit more nitpicky, admittedly, but it was distracting me through. I mean, the tone thing is kind of my biggest thing. The tone thing, plus the fact that I don't really think I love any characters yet. I think those are the 2 real big things that are not quite clicking for me. I love that we're getting more lore. I love that they spent a lot of money making the sets look good. The ship that crashes looks a lot like the Nostromo from, well, not on the outside, but in the inside. Like, the hallways and the doors and, the mother computer and all that stuff. And one of my complaints about Alien Romulus when it came out is that it was a bit too fan servicey, right? That was the big critique that really dragged me out of that movie, even though I liked a lot of it, was that it was just taking time to quote the original two movies constantly. There's some bigger spoiler stuff that I won't mention in case you haven't seen it, but there was too many things that felt like a fan movie because they had to reference the old stuff, and it made it feel lesser than because of it. But I do think the characters and the premise of Alien Romulus got off to a better start. Like, this is the first 2 of 8 episodes, so this is the first quarter of the show, of the season. If I was to compare this to the first half hour, which is the first quarter of Alien Romulus, I would say I liked Alien Romulus' first half hour a lot more than these 2 episodes. And I realize that's a weird comparison, and it's not like entirely one-to-one or fair. I'm just kind of putting across that while I'm not against some of the concepts they're playing with here, there's just things about it that are kind of rubbing me the wrong way, or characters that aren't quite clicking with me. The head of the company that's sort of behind a lot of, a lot of the characters fall under this company named Prodigy, and the guy that's in charge of that is kind of this like young tech, like billionaire, trillionaire genius type dude, and he's kind of quirky, and I don't really like his character all that much. He's been kind of grating on me for the most part, and it's not so much that he has to be likable. I mean, this might be a character who's supposed to be unlikable for where we're going with his story. He might be kind of a monster in a lot of ways. I don't know yet, and that's not a spoiler. I'm just saying, like, I could see it going that way. But even the characters who are ultimately going to be bad or have a lot of flaws should still be interesting or engaging. I should still enjoy them being a wrench there for the other characters or whatever. And I'm just not really feeling that. Another character that's definitely not clicking with me quite yet is Timothy Oliphant's character. He in particular gets a big monologue. Well, it's a dialogue, but there's a lot of it is just him. At the end of episode 1, that was actually one of the reasons why I wanted to wait until I'd done episode 2 or watched episode 2 and review them together, because I really hated the ending of episode 1. Because it was a bunch of kind of pretentious, like, the animal kingdom, there's always something that can eat you, and very ominous. And I didn't really feel like it had a good cliffhanger. It felt like kind of like a weird like ending. And I think episode 1 has a much worse pacing and structure problem. I really found it just kind of felt like it was jumping around, and like the ideas feel good, but there's a lot of ideas and they feel like they're all kind of just thrown in together, and I don't know if they're necessarily and it's kind of weird where the main premise of the show is about this main character Wendy and like what her and these other characters are a part of, and I'll get into all this in the spoilers, but that feels like it's the main idea the show wants to explore. But it also has to do the alien stuff. It has to do, eggs and facehuggers and xenomorphs. And in episode 1 in particular, not so much episode 2, but in episode 1, I really felt like a disconnect between those plots because they really had nothing to do with each other yet. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. You can have separate plots that eventually intersect. But it almost kind of made some of the alien stuff feel a little bit like it's here because it has to be, right? This is not really what was the interesting part for Holly or whoever to creating the show, but this is like, the price of getting the budget to do these pretty good, admittedly, like effects and things like that, is that we have to be a part of the Alien IP, and and some of the things they're doing do fit in well with parts of the Alien like universe and parts of like the themes of those movies and stuff, but it does kind of feel like the monster stuff is a little tacked on, and I like. At least in episode 1. Episode 2, it felt like it was more the focus, and that's cool, that's fine. And I liked, I definitely liked episode 2 a bit more overall, I think, because I didn't have those same pacing and structure problems. I still had character problems, I still had tone problems, it still wasn't quite clicking for me, and there was definitely like a heartfelt moment near the end that felt fell flat, and it was kind of a shame that it fell flat because it was kind of been built up to like throughout the entire 2 episodes, and I still kind of felt like, I'm not really that fussed yet. About the characters. But one of my complaints as well about some alien media, right? Not so much Romulus. Romulus didn't do too bad a job with this. But something that definitely bugged me in Alien Covenant, which is a terrible movie, and I'm sure there's some other examples, but that's the one that's coming to mind. And this show is a little guilty of it, is that it does make the xenomorph feel like it's not quite as formidable as it should. You know, I mean, obviously, aliens compared to Alien by its nature, you've got Marines with giant weapons, so they can take some of them down. Like, they're not invincible or anything. But, you know, it makes the group of aliens feel like a huge threat that's impossible to deal with. And, you know, Alien Covenant, one of the problems with that movie is that it spends like, you know, 2/3 of its runtime before we even get to the xenomorph existing. So it kind of has to speed run through the idea of an alien movie, of it being on the ship and sneaking about and whatever. And the result is that it feels all so rushed and so quick that it doesn't really feel like it has the same weight or menace as the original film. It makes it feel like this lesser, easier monster, and then it also feels that the characters are able to defeat the monster far too easily. And I'm not saying that that's exactly what happens here. It's not quite that, but there's definitely a moment in episode 2 where I felt, oh, this feels kind of easy. And maybe another problem that I was kind of having related to that is that you know, like, obviously when you're watching like a horror movie or, you know, like a monster movie or anything that has like a big threat, and you've got characters who are main characters who are going to survive until near the end, if not the whole way through, so they can't die, right? And one of the biggest complaints that you see people throwing around with a lot of things, especially in the horror realm, is the idea of plot armor, and that certain characters should really be dead by now, but somehow they keep making it out. And I think some people are too quick to throw that around. I think that, obviously, yes, main character A is not going to die in the first act. That's okay, right? We all understand that on some meta level. But as long as it feels like the way they're just escaping each time is thrilling, as long as it feels like they're just getting away with the skin of their teeth, that's okay. What bothers me more is when it feels like the story doesn't like give me the you know, doesn't give me that close call where they're just getting away, where it feels like they somehow, like, it's one thing for like an alien to say swipe at you just as the door's coming down, and it's like, oh, they just got away in time, they got lucky, fun moment, thrilling, whatever. It's another thing when you stand and stare at the alien for a good 10 seconds and then something distracts it. That feels a lot more plot armory to me. And there's a couple of moments in episode 2 where I felt like characters probably should be goners, and they weren't because they've got more plot. So, you know, I hate even critiquing that, but because normally I'm not someone who really cares that much about it if I'm into everything else and it's doing stuff, you know, fairly well. And there's some fun moments in episode 2, but it is guilty of some of these things, and you combine that with the tone feeling kind of mismatched, so I'm not even like feeling the proper atmosphere for it. It left me feeling a little bit hollow still by the end, and that's a real shame because I wanted to really love this. And like I said, there is things I like. I like some of the world building. I like, you know, I think the idea of the main character of Wendy and what she's went through and what the company's trying to do, I think is an interesting part in addition to alien lore. So I think at this point I need to go into the spoilers to start talking about these 2 episodes. So yeah, spoilers for episodes 1 and 2 of Alien Earth. You have been warned. I'm going to get into it. I probably won't go into both episodes as much detail as I normally do, just because, one, it'd be harder to remember every little detail, but also just because there's bigger ideas to talk about here. The show starts with like text, almost, you know, like The Expanse or something like that explains the world. But what it explains here is that like all these corporations on Earth are all racing to try and find a way to create immortality. And they're doing it through 3 different methods. One is synthetics, which is full android bodies. And obviously we've had androids in Alien before, right? That's a thing they've been doing. But the goal ultimately being to want to put a human consciousness into a synth body. And then you've got cyborgs, which is human beings that are augmented with technology, which I don't think we've seen. I mean, maybe there's probably stuff in like comics and stuff, but I don't think there's been tons of that, if any, in any of the movies. But, you know, fair enough. That's something we're adding in. That's cool. Makes sense. And then the third one is using organic life forms to make what they're calling hybrids. And that definitely obviously feels like it ties into a lot of what Weyland-Yutani has been kind of doing in a lot of the movies and all that stuff. So I was, I was into this little bit of text explaining this, and it was like, okay, you're setting up some clear things for the show. What I think's so interesting, though, is and one of the problems with Alien as an ongoing like franchise is that even Ridley Scott, when he was making Prometheus and Covenant, it kind of felt like he at that point was more interested in talking about the androids and what they were trying to do with those than bothering with more xenomorph stuff. And it's weird because most people coming to an Alien show or movie are kind of there for the xenomorph. They're kind of there for the face hugger in like a different sort of scenario in which the character, like, I think people like the lore, they like Weyland-Yutani stuff, and they like exploring the colonial marines and all these other things that are kind of around it. But I think this idea that we mostly want it to be wrap around to the main alien kind of, the main course is the alien, and then there's like, some sides of the world building and all that stuff. Maybe not everyone feels that way, but I get the impression that most people watching an alien thing are there for the alien, for the most part, right? Or they're there for a character they care about, and mainly Ripley is the obvious one, who is such an anchor for those first two movies. And Aliens is such a great example. I mean, Alien as well, to be fair, has a lot of likable characters. Aliens takes that over the top, though, with like just all the Hudson, Hicks, Bishop. Like there's just a complete onslaught of like memorable, likable characters who are flawed, but they're not like quirky or weird because we're trying to be quirky or weird. And I think that's maybe something that was bothering me here as well, as the billionaire, or the trillionaire. We're in the future, you see, it's the trillionaire now. And even Timothy Oliphant's character, who's an android, like he feels a little quirky as well, with the way he's got the blonde hair, and he's kind of just always ominous, which is kind of just him being an android, really. And I suppose he's supposed to be an earlier model versus the ones in the movies because it's set before that. So maybe, yeah, he doesn't act human enough yet because we're not there yet. But which would be an interesting thing to explore. But they've not really went into that too much yet. Anyway, so the alien side of things is that this Weyland-Yutani ship is coming back from getting some specimens. It's implied that they lost a lot of life getting the specimens. We see a very homage, fan service, if you want to call it, that sequence of the crew waking up that looks exactly like the first Alien. They're in the circle, they're having breakfast afterwards, they're talking about their trip, and it's very similar to Alien. I'm not going to really honestly give this too much crap, though, for being a bit of fan service, because I think the way it is works, because one, they know that they can't just keep focusing on this. Like, we can just kind of skip over the whole alien adventure they have off camera because we understand what the alien adventure is. But, it's only the opening scene, and the opening scene's maybe the place where you're most allowed to like give people a little bit of a comfortable, hey, you know what Alien's supposed to feel like. Here's an example, and let's get back into it. My problems with the stuff on this alien ship, with the Mignati? Migatoni? I forget the name of the ship. Sorry. Doesn't really matter. It's when we go back to it. This first one's just a kind of a nitpick for my tastes, but they do like a over-the-top CG shot of where the camera's outside the ship and then it flies into the ship and it sort of goes down some hallways in this swooping kind of motion. I don't like that because it feels very fake to me. I'm someone who I've kind of learned over the years that one of the things that makes like visual effects or like a sequence work for me is that even when you don't have to like have limitations of how you would shoot it for real, when you just do something that clearly cannot be shot for real, it kind of takes me out of it and just feels fake. So again, that's just like a one taste like nitpick thing. The bit that really bothered me though is that there's the one guy on the ship, Morrow, who's a cyborg. He has like a fancy hand that has like a flamethrower in it and does other things. And it kind of glows a little bit. But he seems to be the one on the ship who's like devoted and working for Weyland-Yutani. At first I thought he was just an android because he was, kind of like Ash in the first movie. He's the one with the company's interests in mind. But they make it clear he's a cyborg, which I think means that he's still human as far as the rest of his body is. So therefore which is interesting, I guess, because it means he's like loyal to Weyland-Yutani, not because he's programmed to, but because he just is. Or Yeah, it is Weyland-Yutani. I was doubting myself there. This is a Weyland-Yutani ship. The rest of the show, the city they crash into, the company that's doing all the synth stuff, that's all Prodigy, which we will get into. But this is a Weyland-Yutani ship, which makes sense because it looks like a Weyland-Yutani ship. So there's a bit here where he's in the mother room and he's basically just updating on the computer and saying, "Hey, we're going to crash into Earth, and containment's failed, blah 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 blah." And I was sort of saying this earlier, but this woman who was part of the crew runs up to the door and starts banging, saying, "Let me in, let me in." And obviously, as he starts to he basically gets a blowtorch out of his arm and starts to seal the door, so it definitely cannot open. And she sort of realizes, and I'll be honest, the acting from this woman I thought was terrible. It's not even so much like the rest of the acting on the show is mostly fine, right? Not necessarily blown me away, but not terrible either. But this particular performance, it just did not feel panicked enough. It felt like someone who is like worried they're going to miss the last cookie, as opposed to someone who thinks they're about to die. Almost. I'm being a bit hyperbolic in saying it that way, but it just didn't feel as panicky and as desperate enough as it should have been. Anyway, so he hides in this sort of like coffin looking thing underneath the mother computer, and they crash, and we get a big sequence later in the episode where they crash into the building. And by that point, we've learned who the brother character is, Hermit, of Wendy. So Wendy's not her real name. She picks that name when she sees the synthetic body she's going into, which leads us to the premise of what her character is and what the company's doing with her. Is that she is a sick girl. She's got cancer or something to that effect, and she is dying. So they're going to put her into a synth body, and she is the first person, the first human being whose consciousness has been put into a synth body. And we learn some interesting details here that they can't do this to adults. Something about adults' brains having been developed too much or something, it can't work. But it can still work with children. So they're doing all their first tests on kids who are dying, and they're all sworn to secrecy. Her brother thinks she's dead, and I don't mind her having this brother and having this reason to go and find someone. I actually think the performance from what's her name, Cindy Chandler, I think her performance is actually pretty good, right? As much as I do think her and the other quote unquote kids who are in synth bodies, because by later in the episode we get a whole 5 or 6 of them who are all in synth bodies, but they're all technically children, which means they're all reacting in ways that feel a bit kiddie, and obviously that makes sense. But tonally, when they show up to the ship in episode 2, it just kind of felt weird to me. I don't know, the tone never really came cohesive for my taste. But I like her having someone she cares about. I like her having this reason to go get him. I did remember from the trailer, her saying to the boss, the trillionaire, "Hey, we're not human. We can go and do this, and you can't." And I assumed when I saw the trailer that was going to be, "Oh, let us go into the ship where all the aliens are, because we're not human, so we can, we've got super strength, we can take a beating, we can do this or that." And the actual reason is a lot more thin than that. Basically, because she sees her brother as one of the first responders, as because he's a medic, he's going in to help with this crisis. She basically convinces, "Hey, humans can be hurt. You should send us in to help." And the trillionaire basically just kind of gets a bit of a chubby and thinks, "Oh, this is a great idea. We can test them and monitor their vitals and all that." But it didn't feel as exciting or as a reason. It felt like she kind of tried her luck as a reason to go see her brother, and he just kind of gave in, even though they all know she's watching her brother via security cameras and stuff constantly. There's several scenes where she's doing it, and it cuts to him and his henchmen and the psychiatrist lady and everyone else, and they're all watching what she's doing, so they know full well what she's up to. But yeah, so I think that, and honestly, it feels a bit weird watching an alien movie and having characters watch a movie that we recognize. Ice Age, of all things. I'm assuming the first one. I've never seen the Ice Age movie, so I can't comment too specifically. But there's flashbacks to her and her brother watching them as kids, and they even quote the movie in the second episode. And I'm like, this is so weird. It's so weird to think of the cast in the first Alien might have seen Ice Age on TV when they were on Earth. partly because it didn't exist yet, but it's just, I know we're in our future technically, but the alien future's so far away, and it's like such a specific feeling that having them pull up Ice Age or anything else, it could be a Pixar movie or whatever, or even like a serious movie. If they started watching, I don't know, Schindler's List, I think that would feel weird as well. Uh, it's just, there's something about like bringing up real media in science fiction that just feels a bit strange to me. Um, obviously it's a Fox property, and that's why I mean, technically it's Disney, and Disney could just shove a Pixar movie in there if they wanted, but they specifically picked a Fox one, which maybe was intentional. Maybe they wanted that 20th century Fox lineage of Alien to be carried on in whatever they were watching, so they picked Ice Age. Anyway, like honestly, like I got to the end of episode 1 and I was so worried about like having a lot to say about the scenes, because honestly I think episode 1 drags a little bit. I did not think the pacing was very good. um we spend a lot of time on the island where these synth and like these kids get into the synth bodies is happening, and she's kind of acting like a big sister to the others because she did it first, and we see she can jump from like 100 feet in the air and land on her feet and she's fine. It's doing this stuff, and it's like, okay, you're kind of a super person, like you basically should be a superhero once we get to like all the monster stuff potentially. And maybe that could, like, I can see the potential in that. I can see the potential of having this really kind of genuine, heartfelt character in the middle who has like abilities to save everyone, and what we could do with that. I don't think thus far they've really like given me any moments to make it feel like we're kind of like hitting that properly. I mean, it's a bit early for her to have a big save or whatever. Although I thought they were really going to at the end of episode 2 when the alien was kind of coming after her brother. I really thought like the big thing was going to be her jumping over and like kicking it or something. And because of her strength, it would actually pack a bit of a punch and send it flying. But that's not quite what happened. Instead, he kind of fell to what should be his death. Although I'm 100% confident that he is going to just wake up and be a bit hurt next episode. So it feels a little bit tropey, I guess, in some ways like that. Like I said, though, the end of episode 1 did leave me feeling a bit weird because like they're on like their way to the city. And the final thing, other than just being like, hey, there's creepy stuff happening on the ship. This alien parasite thing has killed a couple of the soldiers that went down. I do appreciate that the Prodigy like Marines look very different from the Colonial Marines. Assuming the Colonial Marines are tied to Weyland-Yutani, it makes sense that like the other like powers, the other super powered corporations have a bit of a different looking military and things like that. So I like that touch. So yeah, and I mean honestly, I don't really have like much to say about the parasite stuff in episode 1. The main key plot beat is that Morrow is still alive and kind of handcuffs the 2 soldiers that he runs into and runs off, and they end up getting killed by like an alien parasite thing that just kind of sucks on them, I guess, and it gets kind of fat and then falls off because it's like feeding on them or whatever. There's a really cool thing in episode 2 though with an eyeball. There's like a sort of like half-dead cat and then the eyeball comes out. It's very The Thing, and I appreciated that. I thought that was good creature horror. It was probably my favorite horror monster moment of the both episodes was that eyeball thing. Very, very good. But yeah, the end of episode 1 is that they're flying on the way there, and other than a little bit of like, bad things are happening in the ship that they're trying to go to, the ending is basically Timothy Olyphant just having this speech with Wendy, where he kind of just says, the human beings convinced themselves that they're above the food chain because they built technology to not be food, but eventually you'll be food again. There's going to be food, and I don't know. The entire speech really did not work for me. Partly just because I feel like I've seen enough science fiction, not even just Alien, but I've seen enough science fiction where like an android or a robot makes some kind of like you're inferior speech or something like that it never really did much for me. And when it cut to black, I genuinely kind of felt like, wait, that's what we're ending this first episode on? This is your hook for me? So I think the first episode lacks a hook. And maybe, they're assuming everyone's going to watch the 2 together because they put them out together. But to be honest, if that's what they're thinking, if they're thinking, we're going to put them out as a double premiere, then just actually make it a double premiere. Actually edit them together as 1 2 hour special episode. Because that's what they used to do. Back in network TV land, when shows would have double premieres, they'd make like a 2 hour pilot. I mean, without ads, it'd be like 80, 90 minutes. But, you know, like that's what they would do. So if you're banking on, oh no, the real hook is later, they have to watch episode 2, and we're just going to assume that they will because it's there. I do think that's a little bit of a mistake in general. I don't like Netflix's whole model of we can just make shit and people will just keep letting it play because it'll autoplay. I'm not a fan of that. Like earn my attention for episode 2, okay? Earn it, you bastards. Anyway, there's a lot more alien action in episode 2, of course. It's running around. And there's a couple of alright moments, don't get me wrong. There's the alien, the xenomorph is like on a statue in the background in one scene when the brother's there. And the brothers try to help a soldier like evacuate part of the building. And this was part of the quirkiness that I was like, you know, the guy's having a party and they're all, you know, he's dressed in the old, like, you know, the old kind of like Amadeus style wig and all the rest of it. And he's like, I'm rich. I'm a member of the fancy club and I will not leave. Blah, blah, blah. And he shuts the door, which obviously makes you feel all right about him getting, you know, eaten in half like 5 minutes later. But yeah, the alien appearing in the background, because you can kind of see it before it moves, and that's kind of a fun little, like, oh, it's there. It's worth mentioning, though, that the brother here, Hermit, had already seen the xenomorph. The first time we really see it in this episode is when he is trying to jump across a gap with 2 other soldiers, and the xenomorph jumps out at him. And this is maybe one of these little moments where I felt a bit of plot armor was kind of at play, because it felt like the alien was like, it felt like the alien was close enough to him to get him, but somehow he kept just not getting grabbed and was able to shut an elevator door to get away from it. But yeah, there was that, and then yeah, the alien obviously kills the soldier. I did like that the soldier was just firing his assault rifle around as he was getting killed by the alien, because he was getting kind of ragdolled, and the guns just sort of going do all over the place. I thought that was fun, and then of course it like runs in and like seemingly kills the whole party. And just as it's about to go after Hermit, who's like seeing like, you know, a half-eaten body like, you know, dragging itself around and whatnot, we get. I thought the sister was going to save him, of course, because she's already here at this point. But instead, it was Morrow, who had not been in episode 2 yet, and he's got like an electrocution gun that he takes the xenomorph down with, and it just knocks him out. It doesn't kill the xenomorph, and this is where I was like, okay, this feels a bit like, you know, we're in episode 2. Right? Human beings have only just seen the xenomorph for the first time. And I get that they're saying this guy has already like helped contain a xenomorph because he was on this mission to get them in the first place. And he's a cyborg as well, of course. But it just felt a little bit like we're seeing a xenomorph be knocked out in episode 2. And then not only that, he sprays it with something that turns into kind of like a big sack that he can carry him in or drag him across the... So we actually end this scene with him dragging a living unconscious xenomorph in this big flesh sack, and he's just sort of like dragging him out the room. And there was just something about that visual and just the idea of what was happening. It just made me feel a bit weird, and I kind of like, we're kind of taking a bit of the mystique away here. The idea that you can put a xenomorph in a bag and just drag it away feels a little bit, you know, like, oh, that's cute, I guess. So I don't know, like I would like a bit more, like, make it feel difficult to take down a xenomorph. And yeah, it does get out, of course. It wakes up and gets out the sack. And that's actually the other plot armory bit that I felt was it kills all the soldiers that are holding up Morrow in that scene. But then it just kind of like sticks its head over Morrow's shoulder and lasts for a good, 5-10 seconds of like, why aren't you killing this guy already? And then, of course, there's some noise and the alien rushes off to take care of the noise. It just kind of felt like Morrow had plot armor in that moment because they were milking it too much. If he had just rushed in the elevator while they were being killed and pressed the button, fine. Right? He got away. But they wanted to have this moment with the xenomorph coming over his shoulder. And it's just kind of like, well, I guess he's enjoying the fear, right? He does say they can sense fear. Maybe the xenomorph loves to enjoy that a little bit with its food before it gets killing. I don't know. But yeah, I like... the visuals are largely impressive. Like, the sets are largely very good. The surroundings are generally pretty good. Um, but just yeah, these kind of moments just feel a little bit like they're trying too hard, or they're trying at the expense of something that feels a bit more logical in the scene. And I can almost feel like the writing forcing these like cinematic moments as opposed to them feeling like a natural, exciting thing that happens. So yeah, so he's fine, but like we'll see what Morrow gets up to. He's trying to protect the specimens for when Weyland Yutani comes, and we see Weyland Yutani specifically, unless that was just an abbreviation. But the woman who calls the trillionaire is like, "Hey, my ship crashed in your city. Can you, authorize one of my teams to come in and collect our goods, our proprietary cargo?" And the trillionaire is like, "Nope, call the lawyers because he wants to steal it all for himself." I do like the idea of the companies having these rivalries and them all having their own military. Like, I do like that part of the alien lore. So I'm kind of into them expanding in that a little bit. It would be interesting to see exactly how Will and Jutani's working. Like, they're merged, but like, they're still like, are like both heads of the company still existing. I think maybe I have to check some sort of alien Wikipedia here to see exactly when they merged and how that worked when they first merged, because I'm sure it's been explored in something at some point. But I know that in Prometheus, which was obviously set before this, they weren't merged yet. It was just Wayland, and in that movie, if I remember correctly. And I'm not fond of that movie. The Prometheus and Covenant are pretty much trash for the most part. So, oh God, what to talk about? All right, so obviously Wendy and Hermit have the reunion, which comes after he has like a childhood memory of his father because he happens to see like a vintage baseball that's been signed, and it's from this specific game in the 70s, and the video plays on screen, but it starts fading in memories of him watching this baseball game with his dead father. Like, this is the sort of moment where I was just kind of like, oh, what is this tone? Like, what are we doing here with this? It just doesn't feel like it fits, certainly with my expectations of what an alien story and how an alien story functions. Um, like, I'm thinking about Alien or Aliens, and even some of the, 3 in Resurrection. I'm struggling to think of like flashback sequences, character past and like flashbacks. I think one of the things that I like about Alien and Aliens and a lot of the stuff that they've influenced for me is this idea that we're only in the predicament we're in. We're only in the moment. And everything we learn about the characters is only in the confines of where they are and the conversations they have. You know? There's not a flashback in Aliens to like, Hicks' childhood to like motivate something for later. So the whole brother and sister thing was starting to feel a little bit melodramatic for me with this flashback. And then, of course, I'm like, okay, he won't know it's his sister. And she's acting kind of weird and smelling at him, but he's not supposed to know. I thought, okay, that's an interesting, predicament to be in for a little while. That's an interesting status quo where we can sort of like play around with this idea that she's not allowed to tell him who she is, and like, but she's obviously trying to save him. She's obviously going out of her way. Maybe she lets like a quote slip, like an Ice Age quote or something. Instead, in the very next scene, while they're walking to the ship from the building that it was crashed in, because they're going, basically by this point, Timothy Olyphant's seen the eggs and he wants people to guard them until they can secure them. They're walking there, and the other guy, the other synth with the kid who's been put in him, just turns around and like says, "Oh, Wendy's not her real name. Her real name is this." And he's like, "Oh, my sister's name was that." He's like, "Oh, by the way, that's your sister." Like, he just tells him in the very next scene. So any like potential drama that we could have got out of him not knowing that that was his sister and her trying to hide it, but clearly being concerned for him, and maybe even trying to like act like she knew what she was doing to impress him, like that's just instantly flushed away. And he doesn't obviously immediately completely believe it because he thought she was dead. And then they have the heart to heart where he says, "Hey, you woke me up on Christmas morning. What did you say to me?" And she says, the right thing. And they hug, and this swelling music plays. And I just, it landed with a bit of a thud for me. One, because again, tonally, it just feels kind of weird in the context of like we're otherwise doing a xenomorph running around killing people. But also just because I don't think that they like, the fact that they just threw away the idea that we're going to play with him not knowing that it's her for a while. just felt weird, and then immediately doing this. So not only did we immediately tell him, this idea where he's doubting if it's true because it's hard to believe is also immediately thrown away, which actually made me think he was about to die. Because they get to the eggs and he's like sort of looking at the eggs all close, and I was thinking, he's the only one in the room that's actually in real danger here. Because he's the only one in the room that's still in a human body. Like the others are all synths. So he's the one that can get face hugged. And I thought maybe, the sad part of this show is going to be like him eventually chest bursting in a couple of episodes' time and she'd be crying. Instead, the xenomorph just jumps out and like they both go flying off, like there's like a hole at the side of the ship, and they both just go flying off the side of the hole. And yeah, we'll see next episode. Because she's Wendy's like, I'm going to go after her. I'm going to go find my brother again. I'm already kind of sick of her looking for her brother, to be honest. I'm a little bit sick of her looking for her brother. Him surviving this after everything he survived in this episode feels a little plot armory. At least him being like, face hugged and being on the verge of like, going to be killed would at the very least be like something different and something dramatic to build up to something that's going to be sad. Because it was like, oh, why do you want Wendy to be sad? Well, she can't be happy all the time. There has to be some tension. She has to fear for her brother and herself at some point. It's meant to be a horror story as well as science fiction. So far the characters aren't really clicking with me, and that I think the performance from Wendy's all right. I think Sydney Chandler's doing a good job of like what she's supposed to be doing for the role. I just think that the brother sister thing feels a little bit melodramatic right now. I think the trillionaire character and his henchmen are a bit just on the kind of like quirky. I don't know, not even quirky is the right word, but just they're going for this very young like Zuckerberg trillionaire type asshole, and I don't know if I'm like, I get why it's relevant. I just don't know if I'm enjoying the character that much. I will say though, his main henchman, the bald guy, that is a weird person to recognize if you're from the UK and you know who that is, because his henchman is none other than Edward Hitler. I'll explain that. So it's an actor named Adrian Edmondson who used to be on some like sitcoms in the UK, and we're talking a long time ago. We're talking the main ones that he's known for are Young Ones and Bottom. Bottom's the one that I grew up kind of watching, but that was like a early to mid 90s kind of thing. And his co-star in that show, Rick Mayall, died relatively young. He was only like about 50 or something like that when he passed away. So I don't think I've seen Adrian Edmondson in anything in over 20 years. Like, I don't know what he's been doing. Maybe he's been doing like theater or something. I have no idea. And he's playing a very serious role. But anyway, his name in Bottom was Eddie, and there was a joke in one episode where someone asked him what his full name was, and he said his name was Edward Hitler. And then the character said, any relation? And he said, yes, I've got a mother. That was the joke. So I just wanted to say that name for when I brought him up. I don't really have much to say about him though. He's just kind of quiet and stoic, and eventually gives some advice to the trillionaire, hands him an iPad or whatever, and that's kind of it. There's not really much to say about him as a character yet, but yeah. I guess I should mention the scene where the trillionaire's talking to the therapist lady, and she's saying how we can't just put them in the synthetic bodies. We have to make sure they have a good quality of life and all that. And the trillionaire basically admits that one of his goals here isn't about making money from all this or becoming immortal, although I'm sure he wants that. It's that he's hoping that these like super kids who have increased intelligence and physical power because of the synth bodies and all the rest of it, that eventually someday he might meet someone who's smarter than him, because he's never felt that. And that maybe one day he'll have a conversation with someone that doesn't bore him, which is basically just him like throwing her under the bus, and she obviously is sitting there feeling offended at everything he's saying. So he's definitely not meant to be likable. So when I say I don't like the character, don't misread that for me saying that he's not likable and I have a problem with that. He's supposed to be not likable. I just don't think he's that entertaining or exciting either. Like, compare it to like, Paul Reiser in Aliens. Like, he's a kind of an enjoyable presence, even once we, he's a bad guy, because he's a slimy bad guy and you kind of want to see him get what's coming to him. I'm sure there's other examples in other movies, but that's the one that sprung to mind because of what we're talking about here. But yeah, so yeah, mixed. I'm pretty mixed. Like I didn't like I want to watch episode 3. I want to watch more. I want to see where they're going with it and get what ideas they're going. Obviously, there's the other species that are on the ship, the other monsters that seem kind of all right. The one that's hanging upside down is like a big plant or something. Like that one, I don't know what I feel about that yet. But the nonchalant way that everyone's kind of reacting to them, is just it's not helping the atmosphere for me. And I think the pacing and the way that we're jumping around the characters so far, especially in episode 1, was not helping any of those things for me either. So, I hate to be a downer, and it's reviewing kind of well, so clearly some people really like it, but I I don't know, maybe part of the curse of loving Alien and Aliens so much, because they are two of like the best of their kind, right? Of anything that's ever been made. Like as far as sci-fi horror goes, sci-fi action, whatever you want to call it, those are immaculate movies, and it means the bar for other things to come in and be a part of that is so high that it's kind of tough. But the funny thing is here though is that I don't think that's really what my problem is here. I feel like my problems from this show feel a lot more like Noah Hawley problems than they do just being difficult to live up to what Alien is. Because the weird tone, the jumping around characters, and some of the sort of monologues and ideas feeling a little bit up its ass, that's Noah Hawley stuff that I don't like that much. So yeah, it's tough. I really hope it grows on me. I hope the characters grow on me so that I can care a bit more about what's happening, and I hope we do some cool stuff with the world as we go further. Because it's bugging me that I'm not like in love with it. I want it to be in love with this. I want to sing its praises. I want to be passionately kind of engaged and say, hey, this is the best Alien thing they've made since Aliens, because that feels like that's what we keep trying to hit, right? Because after Aliens, everything has varied degrees of mediocre, whatever. And I kind of like some of them. Don't get me wrong. Like I enjoy Resurrection, except for the last like 20 minutes, which just shits the bed. But up until that point, I think that's a fun enough movie. It's a big step down from those first two, but as a fun B movie, it's all right. But the goal we keep trying to hit with Alien coming back in some form is to, if you're going to match, if somehow someone ever matches the first two movies, that is a miracle. You cannot expect that. But what everyone is gunning for realistically is to be the best one other than those two, to be third, right? People can argue about which one's 1 and 2. I don't really care. I probably pick Aliens because it just slightly hits my taste a bit more specifically, but it doesn't matter. They're both 10s. They're both amazing. If we just got something that was like great, doesn't have to be once in a lifetime, it just has to be great and be third, that would feel special. That's what everything's gunning for, because it's realistically the thing that you could get to, and nothing's quite hit that, or even really gotten close to that for me yet. And that's, it's a, I don't know, it's the torture of being a passionate fan about something. Hopefully I've explained the things that aren't quite clicking for me here. And I don't mind them focusing on like the androids and synth stuff. It's just almost like it would have been better to just not make it an Alien specific thing. Like have it set in the world of Alien, but by insisting of having the monsters as well, and maybe they'll all fit together better later, and that's okay. But maybe just focusing on the corporate like rivalries and the synths and the cyborgs and all that for a bit first, and just make that the focus would have been good. Although you'd have a number of people screaming, "Where the hell's my monsters?" So I get that it's a difficult balance to strike, and that might have left people upset or bored or whatever. But in a weird way, this kind of like at times is kind of boring me, because it feels like everything's a little bit more thin than I would like in terms of how much focus it's given each thing. So yeah, we'll see how episode 3 is. But my review of the first pair is there's some things to like, but I'm very mixed, and I'm definitely not in love with it. And there's definitely lots of things that are feeling off to me. So we'll see. We'll see. I want to love it. I really do. But we'll see how it goes. Anyway, that's my thoughts on the first 2 episodes of Alien Earth. I'm sure there's stuff that I didn't talk about, but like, I'm at 50 4 minutes already, so we'll call it there. I will see you next week for episode 3. Obviously, you can support everything and help keep the reviews coming by going to patreon.com/MailFuzzTV or by becoming a YouTube member. Thanks to everyone who already supports us. You get bonus content. The movie channel has a lot more bonus content, which is why I would recommend Patreon if you're picking where to support us, because you'll get all the bonuses for the movie stuff. So go check out MailFuzz Movies. But any support from any direction is greatly appreciated. Thank you very much. Of course, you can do a super thanks as a one-time thing if you want to, but that is me. Thank you once again for watching or listening. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?